Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at my two websites, catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletters so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Ed Green. Ed Green is an author and a licensed clinical social worker and licensed professional of the healing arts and member of the National Association of Social Workers. Ed is a longtime student of A Course in Miracles, a spiritual book, and he's blended into his psychotherapy methods and techniques that he writes about in his book, Escape from Insanity, Illusions, and Lies. You can find out more about Ed Green and his wonderful work at his website. I love the name of this website, overcomingtheinsanity.com. That's an easy name to remember, overcomingtheinsanity.com. Welcome, Ed Green.
Well, good morning, Catherine. It's good to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
So Ed Green, many people may have heard about A Course in Miracles, but not know what it is. First of all, what is A Course in Miracles?
Well, that's an excellent question to get started with, Catherine. The Course in Miracles was written by Helen Schucman and published in the mid-70s, and includes text, a workbook, a teacher's manual, and two supplement pamphlets, The Song of Prayer and Psychotherapy, Purpose, Practice, and Process. And the course establishes the premise that we are spiritual beings living a human experience in a world of form. And we're asleep, and we're not aware of the creative power that we have because of who we are. The result is miscreation that can cause us a lot of problems, and can lead to an emotional distress that can trap and imprison us. Now, my focus was the psychotherapy pamphlet, and it goes into this much more clearly, and describes the importance of relationships when it comes to healing.
So Ed Green, author of Escape from Insanity, Illusions, and Lies. Here we are at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. And I want to establish that here at the Natural Healing Show, we have great respect for religions all over the globe. And we're not here to convert anyone. We're here to talk about natural healing. In your professional opinion, what does A Course in Miracles have to do with natural healing?
My take on the Course in Miracles, especially since my book was the focus of the psychotherapy pamphlet, from a psychotherapy perspective, is that the Course really highlights a process of healing through healing perceptions. And when we can see things differently, then we have an opportunity to make a different choice. And then healing is perceived. And when that happens, then we are able to see things more appropriately, prevent the past from interfering and superimposing itself on the present. That gives rise, and when that happens, it gives rise to illusions. Once healing is healed, then we can see things more properly, and that's part of the healing process.
So great answer. Now, in my work as a medical intuitive healer, I always talk about the 5 levels of healing. You are a soul, you and your soul controls what's happening in your mind and your thought, which is your thoughts and beliefs, controls your emotions controls your energy body, which includes the chakras, the acupuncture meridians, and the breath, and the energy body controls the physical body. So how does A Course in Miracles help to change or heal our thoughts and beliefs?
That's a good question. In my work, in doing psychotherapy and doing workshops, one of the things I find that much of the emotional distress that people are experiencing is because they superimpose the past onto the present. And when that happens, gives rise to illusions, which comes from a thought system. And when this thought system is corrupted by things that, well, usually if something happens and it causes us pain or distress, it affects our whole body. It affects our mind. And uh, and when that happens, we are really unable to see things for the way they really are. And this comes back on us and affects and can affect our health and how our affects our health and the relationships that we have with other people, which can increase the emotional stress that we experience and have even more of an impact on our physical well-being.
So you are a licensed clinical worker and the author of Escape from Insanity, Illusions, and Lies.
Yeah.
As a medical intuitive healer, what I find sometimes is some of the hardest people to heal are ones who have challenges at the mental level. And I'm not talking about insanity, like they're crazy, but they're very set on their way of looking at the world. So it's like the world is full of horrible people and terrible things are going to happen. Why do you think it is so difficult for us to change our minds, to change our core beliefs and our thoughts?
Well, the psychotherapy pamphlet really points out, and I go into detail in my book, is that when we are in this emotional distress, it affects our perception. So the perception is in need of healing. So and because it gives rise to illusions, and illusions is what traps us, makes us feel like we can't escape our emotions. So what I've gotten from the psychotherapy pamphlet are 7 steps, a process to promote the healing by which the psychotherapy pamphlet literally calls psychotherapy, with the premise that all illness is mental illness. So if perception is healed, the thought system is healed, and we can see things more properly. And this is what promotes the healing.
Yes, and I do believe that, again, healing on the mental level is critical because many people are holding thoughts and beliefs, some of which you may be consciously aware of, and some of those are maybe imprinted from our parents, from our family of origin, from our culture, and from, again, there are what's called miasms, which are thoughts and beliefs carried down from generations. What is the 7-step process to promote healing that you discuss in your book?
Well, we've been talking about the first step, and that is the emotional distress that gives rise to illusions and must be escaped in order to continue the healing process. And, and this comes about when uh, our, our internal reactions are to external events. When we react to something internally, it's a reaction to internal events that may not necessarily be real, but they do become real for us. And when that happens, it traps us and imprisons us, and we can see no way out. For example, there was a lady that I worked with a few years back, and she came to me experiencing depression and anxiety over a decision that she made to remarry her ex-husband after 10 years of divorce, and was uncertain if she made the right decision. So in listening to her story and recalling the reasons that she got divorced in the first place, what emerged was fear, anger, and guilt. And the fear, anger, and guilt, when this was identified for her, she began to realize how she was trapped. And only then could she begin to understand that the prison that she felt was of her own making, because she was superimposing the past of things that had happened before onto the future, thinking that it was going to be this way again, as certain things came up as they were moving towards this remarriage. And so she feared that they would happen again. So she took the past, put it onto the future, so it wasn't living in the present. So once she began to understand this, then she began to see it was her internal reaction to external events that was causing her emotional distress that imprisoned her.
So let's go over for our audience. If you could sort of briefly outline for us the 7 steps for healing. So step 1 is
The prison, okay,
okay,
is recognizing that our internal reactions to external events or experiencing um, provoke in us these emotions that give rise to illusions that are not true, but for us they become real and becomes our reality, and that traps us. Now, and that's the first step. And the second step is to recognize that um, and what I use is a prison metaphor, okay? Because the Course in Miracles throughout is talking about the need for escape, to be released, that we're in bondage. So my book follows a prison break metaphor. So the emotional distress and being trapped by illusions is the prison. Now, and a prison, there has to be guards and jailers that we see as standing in our way of our success, that we blame as the reason for things not being the way we want or living the quality of life that we want. And so they have to be overcome and seen for who they really are in the presence, free of illusions based on the past, and what they think might happen or is happening in the future. So they're really not living in the present. And this happens a lot of times when people get angry at another, they see them standing in the way of their success, blame them for their unhappiness, and so are unable to see sometimes that, well, these folks that they saw were jailers and guards are the ones who may be trying to help us. But we don't see that because it goes against what we believe to be the reality, or because we don't like what they may be saying, and we don't see the value in what they're doing. Okay.
So step one is recognizing this prison. Step two is, what's step two?
The step two is recognizing the guards and jailers for
And
who they are.
the guards and jailers. And step three is?
Step three is probably the most difficult part of the escape plan, because any prison, has a warden that oversees everything. This is the ego mind and the thought system that keeps everything in place, that either says, well, you're right and they were all wrong. You were right for attacking them for what they did to you. Or it says, well, you're worthless and deserve everything that happens to you. So we have to realize that the ego mind is the source of the emotional distress, and which gives rise to the illusions. So must be overcome.
So step three is recognizing that the ego mind is the source of our suffering.
Exactly. There was the most dramatic example that I saw of this was a young man that I met in a workshop. His name was Jimmy, and he shared with us before we even got to the model of fear, anger, and guilt, is that he had frequent bouts of depressions where he isolated himself from everyone and then blamed them because he couldn't get in touch with him, when in fact he really didn't want anything to do with him. And the first step in what I call a perception changing event or experience of PCE was when it was pointed out to him that depression was an effect, not a cause. Okay? And then he went on to tell us about a reoccurring dream that he had. And this dream was he was locked in a jail cell, and two guards would come and get him and take him to the warden. And when he got to the warden's office, the warden was sitting behind a desk in a swivel chair facing away from him. And when the warden turned and swiveled, it was him.
Beautiful story. Now, with that beautiful story, we're going to take a short break to listen to a word for our sponsors. So hang in there with us. We'll be right back to hear more from Ed Green. So Ed Green, in the 7-step process that we've been discussing, that you talk about in your book, Escape from Insanity, Illusions, and Lies. So the first step is recognizing the prison. The second step is recognizing the guards and jailers. The third step is recognizing that our ego mind, which you referred to as the warden, is the source of our suffering. What are steps 4, 5, 6, and 7? Briefly for our audience.
Okay. And any good escape plan, there has to be a getaway car. The getaway car in this metaphor are relationships. Okay? It clearly states in the pamphlet that I cover is that we cannot escape alone. Right? We must take someone with us. And usually these are the people that we have seen as those standing in our way that were the jailers and guards. That we embark on a healing process by healing the relationship. Uh, People bring up things from our past, and this puts things in front of us again for reevaluation so that we can think differently about them and make a different choice. Okay? And that's the fourth step. The fifth step is, and any good escape plan, is that you map out an escape route. Okay? The escape route is forgiveness. Okay? And forgiveness is the way given to us to release us from the past by putting things in perspective so that they no longer interfere in the present in our current relationships so that we can move forward in the healing process. Right? The sixth step is in this process on the escape route, and we come across many relationships on the escape route that help us to um, uh, forgive those along the way. And I think the most important part of that is the realization that the main person that needs to be forgiven is ourselves. Okay? And the forgiveness for ourselves is to come to the realization that all the things that we thought before were mistakes and errors that can be corrected rather than sins that can't be forgiven. So when we come to join in this healing process of forgiveness, that we join. And you've heard the old saying, well, two heads are better than one. Well, two heads become one. and 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 when that happens, we join and a common goal or a common interest at the exclusion of self-interest. And then we join together in the collective consciousness where we share the same thought and the same goal. And when we connect on this level, anything can happen, ranging from forgiveness to in past relationships, to solving problems that can lead to our success, to healing the world. It just has to be a common interest for everyone. So, a lot of people say, well, it's escape from insanity, illusions, and lies. Well, where you're escaping to? Well, it's an escape from fear to love. Okay? And this recognition, you may even not even recognize it as love, as this creative force, but it's the removing of blocks that have stood in our way. And one of the lines in the psychotherapy pamphlet that really opened my eyes was that the bringing of the end of the world. And what that meant is brings the end of the world to how we know it. So after this whole process for me took about 2 years to realize what has happened. And at the end of this 2 years, I realized that everything had changed. And then I began to realize this was a process that I've gone through as well. So it changed my perception of things as the perception was healed. And as a result of that, I saw things differently. So my world changed. It ended from what it was to what it is.
And finally, so the fourth step is healing relationships. The fifth step is forgiveness of others. The sixth step is forgiveness of ourselves. What is the seventh step?
Well, the sixth step is the coming together, the joining. It says, and when that happens, when people join in a common goal or interest, then the true one appears. Okay? We become part then of the collective consciousness that makes everything possible, because the creative power that we have is at our disposal. And when we come together in a common goal, great things can happen. We can look around us and just see everything that has happened, that has given rise to our great civilization, where people work together.
And so, and the seventh step is
The escape to the escape from fear to love.
all right. Now, Ed Green, many people, including myself, talk about the healing power of forgiveness.
Yes.
There have been entire books on this. I feel that anybody with cancer, one of the core lessons behind cancer is lack of forgiveness. If you've been diagnosed with cancer, one of the most important things you need to do is ask yourself, who do I need to forgive? Again, beginning with yourself. Why do you think healing is forgiveness is so healing?
Forgiveness is so healing it's healing because I think forgiveness is misunderstood for the same reasons that you're talking about, Catherine, is that we don't realize that healing is for ourselves. Okay? So when we superimpose the past onto the present, that gives rise to illusions, we have these negative thoughts that we project outward onto other people, when it's really projecting what's going on with ourselves. Okay? And when we don't realize that, this begins to work against us. And all of the things that we think other people did to us, we actually did to ourselves. And with illusions, it's when we think we know, but we really don't. So we make up stuff to fill in the gaps. And when that happens, it gives rise to these illusions that begin to work on ourselves with a negative energy, that the emotions of fear, anger, and guilt begin to promote. When we project anger outwards, it's usually anger towards ourselves, not realizing that we don't always see things as the way they are. So we project this onto other people, but this continues to eat away at us. And with guilt, the course makes a direct connection to guilt and illness. When we feel guilty about something, it begins to work on us and can promote the kind of illnesses like you're talking about, the cancer. It begins to literally eat away at us. Right? So by forgiving ourselves and releasing ourselves from the past, then we can create a new reality for ourselves, because that's what we do with our thinking. We have this creative power to be able to create the reality that we want to live. If we continue to have these negative thoughts that we promote outward, then we wind up living that reality. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we believe in something negative is going to happen, we send those thoughts out and bring it back to us. What goes around comes around.
Absolutely. And with these words of wisdoms, hang in there, and we're going to listen to another message from one of our commercial sponsors. And we'll be right back to hear more from Ed Green. So Ed Green, you talk about forgiveness. I talk about forgiveness. The Course in Miracles talks about forgiveness. I have to share this little story. So years ago, I was teaching yoga, and where I was teaching at the time, I was in a church and they let me use the room for free. And there was a women's group that also met sometimes periodically at the same time we did yoga. Well, at any rate, long story short, I the women's group came in the room and they thought they had the room, and we're like, well, we're regularly scheduled here. So we, being the yoga people, we were like, well, we're flexible, we'll go to this other room. And then the women's group were like, oh, no, no, no. So we went back and forth. So finally we're in the room practicing yoga, and we got to the point where we meditate. So when we meditate, our eyes are shut, everybody's relaxing, including me. So I got up from the meditation and I noticed there was sort of a ruckus in the hallway. I went into the hallway, and apparently one of the yoga students from my class had gone in the hallway during meditation and gotten into fight with a woman from the women's group. And in this fight, this yoga person called a woman from the women's group a quote unquote fat cow. Okay, so bad choice of words. And at any rate, the priest was there and he was so angry. He was just practically foaming at the mouth. So I'm there. Of course, I had no idea that was going on because my eyes were shut and I was meditating. So I was trying to manage the situation. And anyway, this whole thing sort of blew up, and it followed a number of emails, and this went up the higher command at the church, and the higher up at the church wanted me to throw this gentleman out of my yoga class. However, it turned out that not only was he a member of my yoga class, he was also a member of the church. And so it became, more and more challenging. And so we're everything going back and forth and back and forth. And so finally, and I'm, trying to think of something wise to say to manage the situation. So finally, I remember emailing back in one of the higher exchanges with the higher up. I said, fortunately, sainthood is not required for membership in yoga class. We're all just trying to calm down and manage our stress. And that just shut everybody up. And then what was funny was following that, I went into meditation, and I got clearly the angel of forgiveness. So many people hear about forgiveness and don't really know what that means. My definition of forgiveness is willingness to let go of bitterness and resentment. And as you say, forgiveness is for us, not for others. So we always think when we forgive, we're going to let those people off the hook. Well, you're letting yourself off the hook. So Ed Green, longtime student of A Course in Miracles, psychotherapist, what is your definition of forgiveness?
Well, my definition of forgiveness, or how I view it from a perspective from a psychotherapist, is and realizing that people can be trapped in their illusions because of what has happened in the past, and they bring it forward and superimpose it onto the present, is very stressful for them, and it takes a lot of energy. And to help them to see that this is something that they have created for themselves by bringing the past forward, superimposing it onto the present, and being unable to, and causing them to not be able to release it or put it in perspective. So my definition is forgiveness is for yourself to be able to release the past, put it in perspective so that it doesn't interfere in the present, so that you can create the future that you want, whether it be success or living the quality of life that you want to live.
Why do you think that forgiveness is so healing?
Forgiveness is so healing because our when our perception is healed, well, our perception is healed as a result of forgiveness, and and much of what happens to us is based on our perception. So it becomes healing when we can change our perception and see things differently, because then we have choices available to us that we didn't see before. And that's what makes healing so important, is that we don't hold things against ourselves that stand in our way of creating the reality that we want to live.
What do you think is the connection between guilt and illness?
The connection between guilt and illness is that when we feel guilty about something, we're holding things against ourselves. Okay, and guilt usually comes from held belief that we somehow did something wrong to someone else without realizing that we may be holding this against ourselves. And when we don't take the responsibility of how we feel, then we turn it in on ourselves. Say, for example, if someone is angry and they feel guilty about being angry, it turns in on ourselves and becomes depression. And depression can have a devastating effect on the quality of our life, our mental well-being, and our relationships. And as one of the symptoms of depression is that we withdraw and isolate ourselves. And this can lead to a lot of other problems, because then we don't take care of ourselves as we need to. And then this becomes a breeding ground for other diseases.
Great explanation. So when you think over your book and the Course in Miracles, what are the most powerful healing principles that you found as you reflect on A Course in Miracles and your book?
I think one of the most powerful and important principles is the realization that giving and receiving is the same. Right? So what we give, we receive. Okay? So if we give good, we receive good. If we receive bad, we receive bad. And it's the quality of our thinking that makes the difference between the two. If we can perceive our reality free of illusions, then we feel good about ourselves. We can feel good about someone else, feel good about something that we did or something that has happened, and we project that outward. Now, if we don't feel good about ourselves, we don't feel good about something that we don't feel good about someone else or something that we did or said. And this is a negative breeding ground that we project outward, which goes out, these thoughts goes out, gathers substances and brings it back. So what we give, we receive. I think once this basic principle is understood, then we can begin to realize that we can create the reality that we want to live.
I love that explanation. And in my work as a medical intuitive healer, people talk about karma. And to me, the simplest way to understand is that whatever energy I put out is what's going to come back to me. And I always feel for myself, and this is a personal conclusion, that the most selfish thing I can ever do is to be kind, generous, and thoughtful to everybody around me. Because when I'm kind, generous, and thoughtful, that's the energy that comes back to me.
Exactly. And it's interesting is because part of this is that we may not recognize this. Okay? For example, my fiance and I were preparing for a couples retreat in the 5 love languages. Okay? And we had done all the things that needed to be done to get things underway, but nothing seemed to be happening. And I began to see frustration getting in the way, coming up, why is this happening? Why is this not happening? And then without my realizing, little things begin to start to happen. And I got caught up in that, and another type of frustration began to seep in terms of how to manage all of these things. Okay? And it suddenly dawned on me, and I was talking with my fiance, this is what I asked for. Because these little things are all part of the whole that are necessary for everything to take place. So in realizing that, I was able to change the course of my thinking and see it as part of the process. Okay? So as a result, it had an impact on the rest of the preparation for the retreat, which then went off very, very well, because it was a change in how I saw things. I saw things differently and acted in accordance with that, rather than the frustration of being overwhelmed.
So someone listening to this, may think, well, how can I recognize when I've become trapped and imprisoned by my illusions? Because the nature of the mind is, I think I'm right. I think I've got it all figured out.
So the Course makes clear that there are but 2 emotions, okay? Love and fear. Okay? When there's love, there's an absence of fear. When there's fear, there's an absence of love. Okay? And we all know what love feels like. We feel good about ourselves, something that we did. Something we feel good about somebody else, or something that has happened. And when there's fear, we don't feel good about ourselves. We don't feel good about someone else, something that we did, or something that has happened. So we can feel when we're being trapped, when this happens, because fear, after all, is false evidence appearing real. Okay? So when that happens and we invest in that fear, then that fear becomes real and true for us. So one way to recognize it is, when fear seeps in, is to pay attention to how we feel.
Great observation. So Ed Green, author and clinical social worker, author of your book, Escape from Insanity, Illusions and Lies. Any final thoughts for our audience?
Well, I think a final thought that I would have from our discussion and from what I've taken away from the Course in Miracles is that even though my perspective on this is of a psychotherapist, the psychotherapy pamphlet makes two distinctions. Eh? One distinction is between therapist and patient, and it simply is that if we give help, we're a therapist. If we receive help, we're a patient. And this shifts back and forth because even myself as a therapist sometimes becomes the patient, okay, when I reach out and receive help. So that's one distinction. The other distinction is between official therapists and unofficial therapists. Now, the official therapists are those who are trained, skilled, and licensed in the healing arts, like licensed professional counselors, psychotherapy, psychologists, psychiatrists, marriage and family therapists, psychiatrists. And unofficial therapists are those who are maybe trained and licensed in other profession, and those who have gifts and talents and special knowledge in other areas. But all of them have the same goal, and that is to help us to escape from the emotional distress that we're experiencing that gives rise to illusions. So in that sense, we're all therapists. And if we're mindful of this, is that when someone asks us for help, we become the therapist. And when we receive help or ask for help, then we are the patient. And in this regard, we are all therapists and are all in a position to help one another, because as we do that, when we help ourselves, when we help another, we help ourselves. And this basically is what the Course is all about.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Ed Green, author of Escape from Insanity, Illusions and Lies. And you can find out more about Ed Green and his wonderful work at his website, overcomingtheinsanity.com. And remember, when you learn to forgive, you free yourself and others to experience health and happiness naturally. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.